on the podium and in the hall. Thank you so much for having me here this morning. I'm a Girmitya, and I'm a proud Girmitya. I'm an Indian and I'm a proud Indian. I'm a South African and African and a proud African. All of this coexist peacefully within my being. And when you look at the flags in front of this podium, the 8 flags there, all attached to the Indian flag, we have something in common. Our histories, the 7 countries' flags that you see here, is tied up with the history of India. It is my history as well as your history. And it's a history of subjugation, a history of suffering, a history of exploitation. But at the same time, it's a history of the resilience of the human spirit, the resilience of the Indian psyche to overcome all of these difficulties and emerge victorious through our respective liberation struggles. That is what we share in common amongst our countries. And I think this is the bond of friendship that is so much alive today in this very fractured world that we find ourselves in. A world where power is right and might is right. No longer a world where all of us are part of one human family, Vasudeva Kutumbakam. And this is the history of the Girmityas. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the history of the Girmityas. As I said, it's not just my history and those of us from Girmitya backgrounds. It is your history as well. And it is important that you understand this part of your history as much as it is important for our own history. And I'm so glad to see so many young people here in the audience today, because you are the future that will write this narrative in its correct perspective. Much has been written about the Girmityas. Not much focus has been placed on this journey. But in recent time, why is it that this term Girmityas, how many of you are familiar with this term Girmityas? Put your hands up. How did it originate? Just a handful of you. So one of the things, you see, I'm a former professor at university. One of the things I would ask you to do today as part of your homework when you go back home, go and research, go into Google and just look into this term Girmityas. And you'll get a whole history of where this originated from and what happened to a sizable part of India under British rule, and how it impacted India and impacted our countries. I think it's important you understand this. I think it's important that we place greater attention in terms of this part of your history and my history. And why this sudden focus on the Girmityas? I'm very pleased it's happening. I think I'm in India just under a year. I arrived here last year in October, but this must be the 7th or 8th Girmitya conference I'm addressing. I'm very pleased to see that finally the light is focusing on this part of Indian history that has been so neglected. When you speak of the Indian diaspora, the 35 million strong Indian diaspora, the focus by and large has been on the global North diaspora. And that is why I have said, look at the flags here. We share something in common. We are all part of the global South. And the old diaspora, I refer to it as the old diaspora, those of our ancestors that left this land virtually as slaves, as was pointed out earlier. Slavery was abolished by the British Empire, not voluntarily, due to pressure, in 1834. And in that very same year, 1834, the British had to find a new form of cheap labor, a new form of slavery, which they called indentured labor. And they started this movement of Indians from both North India and South India, firstly to Mauritius in 1834. And then they spread this throughout the empire to all of the countries' flags that you see here and many others. Our ancestors went to these countries as cheap labor, in slave-like conditions, and treated like slaves. Read up this history. It's important you understand this. The exploitation, subjugation, and pain that they suffered. And how did they pick themselves up? How did these countries pick themselves up? Because the histories of the Girmitya is very much linked to the rise of the countries that we are resident in today. We all were under colonial rule. In the case of South Africa, a further level of discrimination. We had apartheid, based where your existence was based on your race. And yet we were able to lift ourselves out. And what you are seeing today, the rise of the global South, is also why you are focusing more and more on this Girmitya community. As I said previously, even when Pravasi was initiated, the first Pravasi, it was dominated by and large, the narrative on what I call the global North diaspora, the wealthy diaspora, so to say, because all of us were shipped to the countries that are regarded as poor, but no longer today. No longer today. And this impacted on us as well, because very much many of the writers, when I speak to Indians today in India about the Girmitya community, you still have a perception that we were poor, impoverished Indians that were sent to all parts of the Indian Empire. But my ancestors may have been poor materially, but they were not poor mentally. They were highly educated in their own culture, their own religion, their own language, and they brought this rich history to all of our countries and nourished these countries. President Mandela, upon our dawn of our democracy in 1994, referred to South Africa as a rainbow nation, because all of the colors of the world that makes up the South African fabric enriches it. And part of that richness is our own Indian history, culture, and civilization that is now embedded in my country and of which we are also proud. Not just us as Indians, but all South Africans. So I think it's important that we shine the torch on the Girmitya history and distinguish it from the Indian diaspora of the global North. Because a person born in Guyana or Suriname or South Africa has a different upbringing and a different view of the world, coming from developing countries, coming from countries that were under colonial rule like yourselves. Our upbringing is totally different from an Indian that migrated to Norway or to London or to Los Angeles. They have a different view of the world, rightfully so, because they come from a developed part of the world. Our struggles still continue this day. The tariffs that are being imposed on India, imposed on my country, the BRICS countries in general, is nothing but discrimination and an attempt to subjugate the rise of these countries. But what we have seen is a civilizational rise. The rise of India has brought a sharper focus on the rise of the Girmitya community. Not because the countries we live in also are not rising. They are also becoming powerful countries of the global South that cherish the sovereignty and are prepared to fight for that sovereignty in this day and age. So what we are seeing as part of the global realignment is also creating the space for us to assert our own identities and rewrite our histories. And this history must be rewritten in its true form, not from the perspectives of those that have a lopsided view of this Girmitya history. I'm saying this to scholars here in India, to students here in India, and to scholars and students in our countries. We need to rewrite this narrative. We need to better understand this narrative, and we need to rekindle and strengthen these bonds. Because the rise of India, as Sri Aurobindo said, the rise of India is also the rise of Sanatan Dharma. We experience this on a daily basis. You see it. And as you rise, we also rise with you. because you also give us that confidence in ourselves, in our culture. India is a civilizational culture, and we are proud to be part of that civilizational culture. India will occupy its rightful stage on the global stage, no matter what tariffs you may put, what other barriers you may put. When the tide is rising, no amount of sandbanks can prevent the tide from reaching its goal. India will become stronger, so will we become stronger, so will the global south become stronger. When you chaired the G20, you focused on the global south. The first summit, the Voice of the Global South, was chaired by Prime Minister Modi, focusing on our common heritage and our common struggle to regain our rightful place in history. And as you rise, we will become stronger. Prime Minister Modi earlier this year, in January at the 18th Pravasi Bharatiya Divas, for the first time in his speech, I was present there, dedicated a substantial part of his speech to the Girmitya community. And all of us that were there, and all of these countries that are reflected here were there, we took great pride that finally Bharat is recognizing its own children that were abandoned, not through its own doing, but under British rule. Prime Minister Modi also set forth a vision of what he would like to happen in terms of the global Girmitya community, including working towards a global conference of the Girmityas, setting up research centers, making documentaries and films about the Girmityas, and what the Girmitya Foundation, and I'm very thankful, one of the first organizations that came to see me when I arrived here was the Girmitya Foundation. Shri Dilip Giri is sitting here, and Ajit ji is also sitting here. Both of them came to my office, and the first thing I told them, help me find my roots. If we don't know our roots, we don't know our place in society. And I think that's the search of every Girmitya, is to find the roots so that you know that you are rooted in this world. And I think all of us have that desire. And the Girmitya Foundation has been magnanimous in that. They've put in resources, they've sent people and identified the village from where my ancestors came. And I will shortly go there, even if I do not find family, but at least I can touch the soil where my great-grandparents were forced out of. But what I want to also say, that it's almost 9 months since Modi ji made the recommendations on setting up a Girmitya center. We have not heard anything from the authorities yet. What is the thinking in this regard? Because Prime Minister Modi did say in that speech he will task his officials to take forward their recommendations. I've heard informally that a global Girmitya center will be set up here in Delhi within the RIS, the think tank here, a very respected think tank. And I also heard that they will work towards a global Girmitya conference. But we hope that the authorities will consult us, because as I said, this has to be a joint venture. It is not a Girmitya center about us. It is a Girmitya center about us and about you also. So it has to be a joint project where we co-own it. As much as it is owned by you as Indians, it must be owned by us, whether it's Trinidadian, Guyanian, Fijian, South African, or Jamaican, or Surinamese. We must be part of this process, and we are very willing to be part of this process. And I think we have a good story to tell in terms of the resilience of India, the resilience of its people, no matter where you may scatter them, under whatever conditions, that they will rise and will continue to rise, and will play an important part in giving leadership to the global community, like India is doing under severe pressure at the moment. You are not buckling under pressure, and you should not buckle. So are our countries of the global south. We must stand united, and we must provide leadership. And part of this history is strengthening the bonds that exist between you and the Girmitya family globally. We are part of you, you are part of us. Thank you for having me.
अगर आप ये वीडियो YouTube पर देख रहे हैं तो हमारे चैनल को सब्सक्राइब करें और बेल आइकन को दबाना ना भूलें। अगर आप Facebook पर ये वीडियो देख रहे हैं तो हमारे पेज को लाइक करें।